The phone's screen was a spiderweb of cracks, a map of every time it had slipped from her tired hands. It glowed with a final, damning notification. Eviction notice, 24 hours. Imani Wallace stared at the words until they blurred. She was tired. She was hungry. She was alone. The tiny apartment, once a cozy haven shared with her mother, now felt like a cold, hollow tomb. It had been 6 months since the funeral, 6 months since the laughter had died, leaving only the hum of the old refrigerator and the drip of the leaky faucet. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost smell her mother's lavender perfume, almost hear her voice, warm and steady. Dignity, Imani. It's the one thing they can't take from you unless you give it away. The memory was a comfort and a curse, a reminder of everything she had lost. Her job at the library had been the first casualty, a victim of budget cuts. Her savings, painstakingly gathered, had been swallowed whole by her mother's final medical bills. Now there was nothing left. Imani pushed herself off the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning in protest. Her stomach twisted into a tight, aching knot. She walked to the kitchen, a space so small you could touch both walls with outstretched arms. She opened the refrigerator. The little light flickered, illuminating the bleak landscape inside. A half-empty carton of milk, 3 eggs, and a plastic bag containing a few browning lettuce leaves. That was it. That was everything. Her gaze drifted to the worn, floral-patterned wallet on the counter. Inside was her entire net worth, a crumpled $20 bill and a handful of coins. $20 and some change stood between her and the street. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, a dry, rasping sound. It was the kind of laugh that held no humor, only despair. But then her eyes landed on a small, spiral-bound notebook next to the wallet. Its cover was soft with use. It was her gratitude journal, a practice her mother had insisted upon, even on the worst days. "Find one thing, baby," she'd said. "Just one good thing. It's how you keep the darkness from winning." Imani picked it up, her fingers tracing the familiar indentations on the cover. She opened it to a fresh page, her hand trembling slightly as she uncapped a pen. What was there to be grateful for? The eviction notice? The gnawing hunger? The crushing weight of her grief? The pen hovered over the paper. Then, through the grimy window, a single defiant ray of afternoon sun broke through the gray clouds, splashing a patch of gold onto the peeling linoleum floor. She wrote, "For the sunshine." It wasn't much. It wasn't a meal or a home or a hug. But it was something. It was a pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. Bolstered by that tiny act of defiance, she made a decision. She zipped the $20 bill into her pocket. She wasn't going to spend it on a meager meal for herself, a meal that would only delay the inevitable for a few hours. No. She was going to do something her mother would have done. There was a man she saw every day on her way to the temp agency, an older man who sat hunched on a bench near the bus stop, his face etched with a permanent weariness. He never asked for anything, just stared into the middle distance as the world rushed by. Today, she would buy him a hot meal. It was a small act, perhaps a foolish one given her circumstances, but it felt right. It felt like holding on to her dignity. It felt like honoring her mother. She put on her thin jacket, took a deep breath of the stale apartment air, and walked out the door, leaving the eviction notice glowing on the table behind her. The city air was damp and cold, carrying the metallic scent of impending rain. Imani clutched her jacket tighter, the fabric doing little to ward off the chill that seemed to seep into her bones. The streets were a blur of hurried faces and honking cars, a river of humanity flowing around her as if she were an invisible stone. Each person was wrapped in their own world, their own worries, their own destinations. She felt profoundly, achingly separate from it all. She walked past shop windows filled with things she could never afford: sleek electronics, vibrant clothing, gourmet foods. It was like looking into another dimension, a world of warmth and plenty that was utterly alien to her own. Her hunger was a constant, dull throb now, a physical manifestation of her emptiness. She ignored it, focusing instead on her mission. One hot meal for one person, a single, focused act of kindness. Her path took her past a restaurant called the Gilded Spoon. It was one of those places designed to radiate exclusivity. Its large windows were framed in polished brass, and through the pristine glass, she could see tables draped in crisp white linen, set with gleaming silverware. Patrons in expensive suits and elegant dresses laughed and conversed, their world insulated from the cold, gray reality of the street. It was a fortress of wealth. As she was about to pass by, the heavy brass door swung open, and a man stumbled in from the street. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a thick mane of graying hair and a deeply lined face. He wore a worn, dark green jacket that looked like it had seen decades of hard use. He was shivering, not violently, but with a deep, systemic cold that made his shoulders tremble. He didn't look homeless in the stereotypical sense. His clothes were old but clean, his face weary but not vacant. He looked lost and incredibly tired. He stood just inside the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the immaculate marble floor, blinking in the warm, golden light as if emerging from a long darkness. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a silent, forlorn figure against the backdrop of casual opulence. The hostess, a young woman with a practiced plastic smile, saw him. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance and apprehension. She studiously ignored him, turning her attention to rearranging a stack of menus. A couple, dressed for a night out, were leaving the restaurant. The woman, wrapped in a fur stole, recoiled dramatically as she passed the man. "Ugh, honestly," she said to her companion, her voice loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Can you believe they let people like that in here? It completely ruins the atmosphere." Her companion, a man in a tailored suit, grunted in agreement. "Security should be faster. It's a disgrace." Imani felt a hot flush of anger rise in her chest. The couple's casual cruelty was like a slap in the face. She watched the older man. He heard them. She saw his shoulders slump just a fraction, a subtle, almost imperceptible flinch of pain. Yet he remained silent, his dignity a quiet shield against their venom. It was then that the manager appeared. He moved with an agitated energy, a man whose pristine world had been violated. He was in his 40s, with a sharp, pointed face, thinning blonde hair slicked back from his forehead, and a name tag that read, Mr. Abernathy. His eyes, small and hard, were fixed on the intruder. "Can I help you?" Abernathy asked, but his tone made it clear it was not an offer of help. It was a challenge, a demand. The older man seemed to gather himself. His voice, when he finally spoke, was raspy but clear. I just needed to get out of the rain for a moment, to catch my breath." Abernathy's lip curled into a sneer. "This is a fine dining establishment, not a bus shelter. We have standards. You are disturbing our guests." Imani's heart ached. The man wasn't disturbing anyone. He was just existing. His crime was his appearance. His crime was his poverty. She thought of her mother's words. Dignity, Imani. She thought of the $20 bill in her pocket. She knew what she had to do. The warnings of the bystanders, the cold glare of the manager, the potential for her own humiliation, it all faded away. All she saw was a human being, cold and weary, being treated as less than human. She couldn't just walk away. It wasn't in her. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy brass door and stepped inside the Gilded Spoon. The warm air, scented with garlic and rosemary, enveloped her. She walked past the disapproving hostess and straight towards the unfolding confrontation, her worn sneakers silent on the polished floor. She clutched the $20 bill in her hand, the paper warm and damp against her palm. It was her last $20, and she was about to spend it. "Excuse me," Imani said, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. Mr. Abernathy turned, his expression shifting from contempt for the old man to irritation at this new interruption. He looked Imani up and down, taking in her simple jeans, her faded jacket, her worn-out shoes. His eyes dismissed her instantly. She was another piece of refuse that had blown in from the street. "What do you want?" he snapped, his impatience palpable. "I'd like to buy this gentleman a meal," Imani stated, holding his gaze. She gestured towards the older man, who looked at her with a flicker of surprise in his tired eyes. "Whatever he wants. And a hot coffee to start." Abernathy let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a nasty, grating sound. "You want to buy him a meal? Here?" He gestured around the opulent dining room at the crystal glasses and the silver cutlery. "I think you're both a little confused. This is not a soup kitchen." "I have money," Imani said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She held out the crumpled $20 bill. "This should be enough for a main course and a drink." The manager stared at the bill as if it were a dead insect she had placed in his palm. He didn't take it. He just looked at it, then back at her, a smirk playing on his thin lips. "That's very touching," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A real little Samaritan, aren't you? But we have a right to refuse service to anyone, and we are refusing service to both of you. You are not our clientele." The older man, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Young lady," he said softly to Imani, "you don't have to do this. I'll be on my way." "No," Imani insisted, turning to him. "You're cold and you're tired. You deserve a hot meal just like everyone else in this room." She turned back to Abernathy, her eyes flashing. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You have no right to treat him this way." This seemed to infuriate the manager. His face, already pink with agitation, deepened to a blotchy red. "I have every right. I am the manager of this establishment. I decide who belongs here and who doesn't, and neither of you belong here. Now I am telling you for the last time, get out." He took a step towards the older man, his hand reaching out to grab his arm. The man flinched, a subtle but clear movement of pain and apprehension. That was the final straw for Imani. She moved quickly, placing herself between Abernathy and the older man. "Don't you touch him," she said, her voice low and fierce. Abernathy was taken aback by her sudden ferocity. He stopped, his hand hovering in the air. Then his shock morphed into rage. He felt his authority being challenged, publicly, by this nobody. "You have a lot of nerve," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Who do you think you are? Coming into my restaurant, defending this vagrant." He poked a finger into her shoulder, shoving her back a step. "You want to defend this trash so badly? Fine. His eyes scanned the room, a cruel idea forming. The restaurant had grown quiet. Diners had stopped their conversations. Their forks paused midway to their mouths. Phones were beginning to emerge, their small black screens turning to face the drama. They were a captive audience. Abernathy's voice rose, projecting to every corner of the room. You want to stay? You want a meal? Then you can get on your knees and beg for it. Both of you. Get on your knees where you belong. A collective gasp went through the room. Some people laughed nervously. Others looked away, suddenly fascinated by their water glasses. The humiliation was thick and suffocating. Imani felt her face burn with shame. Her legs felt weak. To be spoken to this way, to be ordered to kneel like a dog in front of a room full of strangers. It was a violation. The older man placed a gentle hand on her arm. "It's not worth it, child," he murmured, his voice filled with a profound sadness. But Abernathy was on a roll. He was performing now. "What's the matter? Too proud to beg? You come in here looking for a handout, and now you're too proud?" He pulled out his phone, his movements sharp and theatrical. "That's it. I've had enough. I'm calling the police." He dialed 911, his thumb jabbing at the screen. He put the phone on speaker, holding it up for everyone to hear the ringing. A calm, professional voice answered. 911. What's your emergency?" "Yes, hello," Abernathy said, his voice laced with false panic. "I'm at the Gilded Spoon on Elm Street. I have 2 vagrants in my restaurant causing a disturbance. They're refusing to leave. Yes, they're becoming aggressive. I'm worried for the safety of my patrons. Please send officers immediately." He hung up, a triumphant, cruel smile spreading across his face. "The police are on their way," he announced to Imani and the older man. "They'll sort you out. Maybe a night in jail will teach you some respect for private property." Imani stood frozen, trapped in a nightmare. The whispers of the crowd, the cold stares, the manager's sneering face, the impending arrival of the police. It all swirled around her. She had tried to do something good, something kind, and this was her reward: public humiliation, the threat of arrest. She had never felt so small, so powerless in her entire life. She looked at the older man, his face a mask of weary resignation, and her heart broke. She had only made things worse for him. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She had failed. The wail of a siren grew steadily louder, a sound that sliced through the tense silence of the restaurant. It was a sound Imani had always associated with help, with order. Now it sounded like a death knell for her dignity. Mr. Abernathy's smug grin widened. His victory was arriving. 2 police officers pushed through the brass door. The first was a sergeant, a man in his 50s with a stern, weathered face and sharp, observant eyes. The second was a younger officer, his expression eager and ready for action. The entire room held its breath. "Right here, officers," Abernathy called out, pointing a dramatic finger. "These 2. I asked them to leave repeatedly. They refused. The woman became belligerent, and they were frightening my customers." The sergeant's gaze swept the scene. He saw the smug manager. He saw Imani, her face pale, tears glistening on her cheeks. He saw the crowd of onlookers, their phones still held aloft like morbid torches. And he saw the older man, standing quietly, his shoulders slumped, the very picture of weary defeat. "What's your name, sir?" the sergeant asked, his voice directed at Abernathy. "Richard Abernathy. I'm the manager here. I'm pressing charges. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, whatever you can get them on." The sergeant nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He then turned his attention to Imani and the older man. "And you folks?" Before Imani could speak, the older man took a slow, deliberate step forward. He moved with a strange, pained stiffness, but also with an undercurrent of resolve. He ignored Abernathy completely, his eyes fixed on the sergeant. "What is he doing?" Abernathy sneered. "Looking for his spare change?" The older man reached into the inside pocket of his worn green jacket. His movements were slow, methodical. For a heart-stopping moment, Imani worried Abernathy's cruel jibe about a weapon might be true, though she couldn't believe it. The manager himself took an involuntary step back. But what emerged was not a weapon. It was a wallet. A simple, battered brown leather wallet, softened and darkened with age. The man fumbled with the clasp for a moment, his cold fingers struggling. Finally, it opened. He carefully extracted a single plastic card and held it out to the sergeant. The sergeant took the card, his brow furrowed in mild annoyance, as if this were just another piece of pointless procedure. He glanced down at it, and then everything changed. The sergeant's body went rigid. His eyes, which had been scanning the card casually, widened in disbelief. He looked up from the ID to the old man's face, then back down at the ID, then back up again. The color drained from his own face. He straightened his posture, his spine snapping into a ramrod straight line. It was an instinctive, reflexive motion, a motion of pure, unadulterated respect. "General Thorne, sir," the sergeant said, his voice suddenly stripped of all authority, replaced by a tone of complete deference. He held the ID as if it were a holy relic. "My profound apologies. I didn't recognize you." The younger officer, seeing his superior's reaction, peered over his shoulder. His jaw dropped. He too snapped to attention, his eyes wide with awe. The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the fizz of champagne in a glass across the room. "General." The word hung in the air, electric and impossible. Abernathy let out a choked, spluttering laugh. "General? Are you kidding me? Officers, this is absurd. He's a homeless bum. Look at him. This is some kind of trick. That ID is a fake." The sergeant turned to Abernathy, and the look in his eyes was glacial. "This bum," he said, his voice dangerously low, "is General Marcus Thorne, 4-star General, United States Army, retired, recipient of the Medal of Honor. He is a national hero. This ID is very, very real. And you?" The sergeant took a step towards Abernathy, his voice hardening. "Just assaulted a decorated officer and a Medal of Honor recipient. That is a federal offense." Abernathy froze. The words didn't seem to compute. His brain, so certain of the world's order, of who belonged where, simply could not process this new information. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. As if on cue, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows pulled up silently to the curb outside. The driver's door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit and an earpiece emerged. He moved with an air of brisk, no-nonsense efficiency. He scanned the scene through the window, his eyes locking onto General Thorne, and immediately strode into the restaurant. "General, are you all right?" the man asked, his voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos. He completely ignored Abernathy and the police, his focus entirely on his charge. "Your security detail lost contact. We've been searching for the last hour." General Thorne gave a weary nod. "I'm fine, Davies. Just trying to get out of the rain." The aide, Mr. Davies, took in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. The general's damp and disheveled state, Imani standing protectively beside him, the stunned police officers, the gawking crowd, and the utterly terrified, pale-faced manager. His expression, already serious, hardened into something resembling granite. Abernathy's collapse was total and immediate, the smug triumph drained from him, replaced by a primal animal fear. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. His knees visibly buckled, and he swayed on his feet. A mistake, he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't know. General Thorne finally turned to look at him, his eyes once so tired, now clear and piercing. No, the general said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. You didn't know. That is precisely the point. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely, seismically, and irrevocably inverted. Mr. Davies, the general's aide, wasted no time. His movements were precise, economical, and utterly ruthless. He pulled out a sleek, modern smartphone and tapped the screen once. "Get me Mr. Sterling," he said into the phone, his voice low but commanding. "Now! I don't care if he's in a board meeting. I don't care if he's on another continent. Get him on this line in the next 60 seconds." There was a brief pause. Mr. Abernathy watched the aide, his eyes wide with terror, a man watching the architect of his own doom at work. "Sterling," Davies said, his tone like ice. "This is David Davies, aide to General Marcus Thorne. The general is currently at your establishment, the Gilded Spoon on Elm Street. There has been an incident. Your manager, a Mr. Abernathy, has publicly humiliated, assaulted, and attempted to have the general arrested." Davies paused, letting the words sink in. "I suggest you get down here. Immediately." He didn't wait for a reply, simply ending the call. The name Sterling seemed to suck the last of the air from Abernathy's lungs. Alistair Sterling was not just the owner of the Gilded Spoon. He was the billionaire founder and CEO of Sterling Restaurant Group, a global empire. He was a legend in the industry, a man whose picture was on the cover of business magazines. Less than 10 minutes later, a second black car, even more luxurious than the first, screeched to a halt behind the sedan. Alistair Sterling himself, a portly man in his 60s with a florid face and panicked eyes, burst out of the car and practically ran into the restaurant. He saw General Thorne, and his face went from panicked to ashen. He was a major donor to veterans' charities and had met the general at several high-profile galas. "General Thorne, my God! What happened?" General Thorne simply gestured with his head towards Abernathy, who looked as if he were about to be physically ill. Sterling's eyes followed the gesture, and his face, already pale, turned a shade of gray. He understood instantly the public nature of the scene, the cell phones still recording, the police officers standing by. It was a public relations cataclysm. Sterling turned on Abernathy, his voice, usually jovial and booming, now a strangled, furious whisper. "What have you done?" "Sir, I didn't know. He looked—" Abernathy began, his voice pleading. "You didn't know!" Sterling roared, his voice suddenly finding its full volume. "It doesn't matter who he is. You don't treat any human being this way, let alone a man like this. You are a disgrace to this company, a disgrace to the human race." He pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "You are fired. Fired. Get your personal effects from your office. Security will escort you from the premises. You are never to set foot in one of my properties again." Abernathy's world crumbled. "Please, Mr. Sterling," he begged, tears now streaming down his face. "Please, I have a mortgage. I have a family. You should have thought of that before you decided to play God with people's dignity. Sterling spat. As if on cue, the police sergeant, who had been standing by with grim satisfaction, stepped forward. Mr. Richard Abernathy, he said, his voice formal and loud, you are under arrest for assault and filing a false police report. The younger officer stepped forward and produced a pair of handcuffs. The sharp, metallic click as the cuffs closed around Abernathy's wrists echoed through the silent restaurant. The man who, minutes before, had been the king of his little castle was now being led away in disgrace, his pleas and sobs ignored. The same patrons who had laughed at his cruel jokes now stared at him with cold contempt. The scene was not over. General Thorne, who had watched the proceedings with a somber expression, now took a step forward. He looked frail, yet commanded the attention of the entire room. He turned, not to the billionaire owner or the police, but to Imani. He looked directly at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of a smile in his eyes. It was a kind, gentle smile. "Young lady," he said, his voice quiet but resonant, carrying to every corner of the now hushed space. "What is your name?" "Imani," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Imani Wallace." "Imani," the general repeated, tasting the name. "In 5 minutes, you showed more courage, more integrity, and more character than that man has displayed in his entire lifetime." He gestured vaguely in the direction Abernathy had been taken. He then raised his voice slightly, addressing the room, the sea of faces and phones. "You stood up for a stranger. You offered what little you had to someone you thought was in need. You did it when everyone else just watched, when everyone else laughed or looked away." His gaze swept over the patrons, and many had the decency to look ashamed. "Let this be a lesson to every single person in this room," the general declared, his voice gaining strength. "A person's worth is not determined by the clothes they wear, the car they drive, or the balance in their bank account. It is measured by the content of their character, by their compassion, by their willingness to stand for what is right, even when it is difficult." He looked back at Imani, his eyes soft. "You, Imani Wallace, are worth more than this entire building." A single person began to clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause. It was a wave of sound, a roar of approval and catharsis. The applause wasn't for the general or the billionaire. It was for her, for Imani. The crowd that had been her silent tormentors was now her cheering section. The shift was so sudden, so overwhelming, that Imani felt a dizzying wave of disbelief. She stood there, bathed in the warmth of their approval, the $20 bill still clutched forgotten in her hand, a testament to the simple choice that had changed everything. Alistair Sterling, the billionaire owner, was in full damage control mode, but his actions were tinged with genuine remorse. He approached Imani, his expression a mixture of shame and admiration. "Miss Wallace," he began, his voice humbled. "On behalf of my entire organization, I am profoundly, deeply sorry for what you endured here today. There is no excuse for the behavior of my former manager. None." He wrung his hands, a man unaccustomed to being on the back foot. "Words are not enough. I would like to offer you a position. Not just any job. I want you to be our new National Director of Community Outreach and Customer Experience. I want you to write the policies. I want you to train our staff from the top down on what dignity and respect actually mean. I want you to ensure that something like this can never, ever happen again." He paused, taking a breath. "The position comes with a starting salary of $150,000 a year, full benefits, and a corporate car. Imani stared at him, dumbfounded. The numbers didn't make sense. $150,000. It was a fantastical sum, a number from a different universe. Just this morning, she was facing eviction, her entire world contained in a single $20 bill. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Before she could even process the offer, General Thorne stepped forward, a gentle smile on his face. "A generous offer, Alistair," he said, "and a wise one. But I have a proposal of my own." He turned to Imani. "Miss Wallace, for the past decade, I have run a philanthropic foundation, the Thorne Foundation. We have an endowment of several $billion dedicated to various causes. For some time, I have been wanting to start a new division, one focused specifically on providing direct aid and transitional support for homeless veterans and other displaced citizens. A division that requires a leader with not just business acumen, but with true empathy and moral clarity." He looked her directly in the eye. "I want you to be that leader. I want you to run it. I will give you an initial operating budget of $20 million. You will build your own team, design your own programs, and answer to no one but me and the board. We need someone who understands the problem not from a spreadsheet, but from the heart." He reached into his jacket pocket again. This time he pulled out a checkbook. He uncapped a pen, and using Mr. Davies' back as a writing surface, he wrote. He tore the check from the book and held it out to her. "This," he said, "is a $50,000 signing bonus. But more than that, it's a personal thank you for your kindness to a tired old soldier who just wanted to get out of the rain." Imani looked at the check in his hand. The number was written in clear, bold script. $50,000. Her hand, the one still clutching the $20 bill, trembled violently. She slowly, numbly, reached out and took the check. The paper felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the sheer, shocking force of her transformed reality. "And, Mr. Davies added, stepping forward with his phone, "we've taken the liberty of handling a few immediate concerns. A tow truck is on its way to collect your vehicle. It will be fully repaired, detailed, and returned to you by tomorrow evening. We have also contacted your landlord and paid your rent for the next 2 years. A team is also heading to your apartment with several weeks' worth of groceries, and they will be replacing your refrigerator. We hope that's acceptable." Tears, which she had fought back during her humiliation, now flowed freely. But these were not tears of shame. They were tears of shock, of relief, of overwhelming, incomprehensible joy. She looked from the job offer to the check, to the faces of these powerful men who were now looking at her with such profound respect. She had stepped into the Gilded Spoon a pauper, and she was leaving. She didn't even know what she was. Weeks later, the news cycle confirmed the completeness of her vindication. The story of the Gilded Spoon incident had gone viral, a modern-day parable for the digital age. Richard Abernathy's downfall was swift and total. Convicted of assault and other charges, he received a short but life-altering prison sentence. His wife filed for divorce during the trial. His name became synonymous with arrogant prejudice. In a turn of cruel, ironic justice upon his release, he found himself unemployable, ostracized, and eventually, for a time, homeless, living the very life he had so viciously scorned. His ruin was absolute. Imani, meanwhile, accepted both offers. She worked part-time with Mr. Sterling to develop what became known as the Wallace Rule, a mandatory corporate policy ensuring that any individual seeking temporary, safe shelter in any of their establishments would be treated with dignity, offered a warm beverage, and given a place to sit without harassment. But her true passion was the foundation. She moved from her tiny, cramped apartment into a bright, comfortable new home, and she poured all her energy, all her newfound resources, into building the Thorn Foundation's new division from the ground up. The weight of survival had been lifted, replaced by the profound, exhilarating weight of purpose. 1 year later. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn. Imani Wallace stood on a podium, not as a victim, but as a leader. She was dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit, her hair styled professionally, her face radiant with a confidence that seemed to come from a deep, internal wellspring. She looked out at a crowd of city officials, journalists, community activists, and the smiling, proud faces of General Thorne and Mr. Davies. Behind her, a brand new building gleamed in the sunlight. A large, tastefully designed sign near the entrance read, "The Eleanor Wallace House." My mother, Eleanor, used to say that dignity is the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it away. Imani began, her voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone. She believed that kindness was not an emotion, but an action, a choice, especially when it's hard. This house, she gestured to the building, is a testament to that belief. It's not a shelter. It's a home, a place of transition, of hope, and most importantly, of dignity. The Wallace House was the flagship project of her division at the Thorn Foundation. It was a state-of-the-art facility offering not just beds and meals, but job training, mental health counseling, legal aid, and a path back to self-sufficiency for the city's homeless population, with a special focus on veterans. It was the physical embodiment of the change she wanted to see in the world. It was named for the woman who had taught her everything that mattered. The incident at the Gilded Spoon had become a cultural touchstone. The Wallace Rule that she had co-authored with Alistair Sterling had been voluntarily adopted by hundreds of other restaurant chains and businesses across the country. A small but significant shift in corporate social responsibility. The viral videos of her confrontation with Abernathy were now used in ethics and sensitivity training programs. Her single, costly decision had sent ripples of positive change far beyond what she could ever have imagined. After the dedication ceremony, as the crowd mingled and toured the new facility, Imani felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. It was General Thorne. His eyes, no longer weary, twinkled with pride. "She would be so proud of you, Imani," he said softly. "I hope so," Imani replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I just tried to do what she would have done." "You did more than that," the general insisted. "You took her lesson and you built an empire of kindness with it. You've already changed thousands of lives." Later that evening, Imani left the gala event feeling fulfilled but reflective. Instead of having her driver take her straight home, she asked him to take a detour through her old neighborhood. The streets looked different now, seen from the plush leather seat of a luxury car. She saw the same struggles, the same tired faces, but she saw them now through the lens of power, the power to help. She had the driver stop a block away from her old bus stop. She got out of the car, telling him she wanted to walk for a bit. The air was colder here, the streetlights dimmer. She walked towards the familiar bench, the one where she had so often seen the man she had tried to help. The man who had turned out to be a general. Sitting on that same bench was a young woman, no older than 20. She was huddled in a thin hoodie, shivering. In her lap was a worn backpack, and she was anxiously counting a small pile of coins in her palm. Her face was a portrait of fear and desperation. Imani's heart clenched. She saw herself. She saw the same cracked phone screen, the same empty refrigerator, the same crushing weight of a world that didn't seem to care. She didn't approach with pity. She didn't approach from a position of power. She walked over and sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance. "It's a cold night," Imani said gently. The young woman flinched, startled, and quickly swept her coins into her pocket. "I'm not bothering anyone," she said, her voice defensive. "I know you're not," Imani replied, her tone warm and reassuring. "My name is Imani. I used to sit on this bench and worry too. It feels like the whole world is on your shoulders, doesn't it?" The young woman looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She saw the expensive coat, but she also saw the genuine empathy in Imani's eyes. The defensiveness in her posture softened just a little. She nodded, unable to speak. "It doesn't have to be," Imani continued. "There's a place not far from here. It's warm. They have hot food, a clean bed, and people who can help you get back on your feet. No questions asked. It's called Wallace House." Imani reached into her purse and pulled out not a check, but a simple business card. On it was her name, her title, and a direct phone number. "You can go there right now, and they will take care of you. Or you can call this number tomorrow, and I will personally help you figure out your next steps." She also pulled out a $100 bill and tucked it under the card. "This is for tonight, for a hot meal and a safe motel room if you prefer, just to get you through." The young woman stared at the card and the money, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Imani smiled, a sad but hopeful smile. "Because a year ago, someone helped me. And because kindness is a choice. Now it's your turn to be brave enough to accept it." She stood up, leaving the young woman to her decision. As she walked back towards her waiting car, back towards her new life, she knew she had done the right thing. The cycle of kindness, once started, had to be passed on. It was a debt she would happily spend the rest of her life repaying. She had learned the most profound lesson of all. Your true wealth is not what you keep, but what you give away. And in giving, she had received everything.